Good morning. This is Alan Skinner, and for my topic, I chose to discuss Frank Lambert's Peddler in Divinity. I'll briefly discuss the high points of Lambert's article and then bring up some detailed discussion of Whitefield's style of oral and written communications using the sources listed in the bibliography. Central to Lambert's essay is his examination of what he terms Whitefield's marketing strategies and the creative tension between Whitefield and the economic mechanisms he used to finance and disseminate the gospel. Whitefield leveraged the printed word to prepare the hearts and minds of unsaved Americans to receive the gospel. By 1738, 2 years before the outbreak of the Great Awakening, colonial newspapers routinely carried stories of Whitefield's preaching, reprints of his sermons, along with pamphlets and journal entries. During his 1740 preaching tours, Whitefield personally wrote third-hand accounts of his meetings, including statistics on attendance and collections. Lambert described Whitefield as taking his intended audience into account in his writing and marketing. For example, bound sermons intended for poorer folk were selected for brevity and cheaply bound, thus reducing costs. Quote, "As the generality of those who receive the gospel are commonly the poor of the flock, I have studied cheapness as well as conciseness." Lambert then probes the origins and influences of Whitefield's marketing strategies. Whitefield was raised in a merchant family and spent his formative years working to run the family inns. Moreover, his older brother James was a commercial ship's captain, and his impartation of commercial knowledge and financing helped shape George's blending of commerce and ministry. The rise of Whitefield's ministry coincided with the increasing commercialization of the English world, as rising incomes and easy credit meant consumers could buy not only commodities but luxury items. Whitefield leveraged new marketing strategies, applying them to the propagation of the gospel. Moreover, Whitefield realized merchants were vital to that propagation, as the new commercialism produced a language of goods that extended to human endeavors beyond the business world. Whitefield exploited this new, expanded vocabulary as it provided him the language to define his business as that of propagating the gospel to a parish that encompassed the whole world. Lambert concluded this line of analysis remarking, "What was new about Whitefield was not his appropriation of the market, but his adaptation of marketing techniques, indicating a zeal for propagating the gospel through the most powerful means available." In my remaining time, I want to briefly expand upon Whitefield's style of communications, as it's important to understand how his message resonated with so many people. First, Harry Stout's article, Religion, Communications, and the Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, contained an important observation. With Whitefield's celebrated speaking tours, there appeared an innovative style of communications that redefined the social context in which public address took place. Both speaker and audience altered the roles and language they customarily adopted in public worship. Orthodox preaching of the period rested upon a settled, hierarchical relationship between authoritarian minister and a deferential, socially stratified congregation. Whitefield's revivalist style upended this relationship. The large audiences made social stratification impossible, and Whitefield employed common language to ensure he could reach all members of the audience. Stout summarizes Whitefield's style as a, quote, "repudiation of polite style and the preference for extemporaneous mass address cut to the very core of colonial culture by attacking the habit of deference to the written word and the gentleman who mastered it." Evangelical rhetoric proclaimed the power of the spoken word directly to the individual and confirmed a shift in authority by organizing popular meetings and justifying them in the religious vocabulary of the day, end quote. In his 1994 book chapter, Debating the Great Awakening in the Religious Public Sphere, Lambert expands upon Whitefield's innovation in the written word. Writings were directed to individual evangelicals and the unsaved both, not the church or government. Secondly, Whitefield wrote in the third person to lend an appearance of impartial observation. Most importantly, Whitefield employed the language of reason, appropriate for a rapidly expanding, commercially literate public. Reasoned arguments, supported by clear evidence, were essential in winning debates in the public arena, and in the new marketplace of ideas, Whitefield rebutted accusations of unscriptural enthusiasm and direct revelation by rational biblical interpretation. In opposition to enthusiasm, he, Whitefield, preaches a close adherence to the Scriptures, the necessity of trying all impressions by them, and of rejecting whatever is not agreeable to them as delusions. Lambert concludes this chapter by crediting Whitefield in creating a new, quote, religious public sphere by exploiting the print market. Whitefield redefined popular religion, fashioning something public and national out of what had been private and local. In the process, he empowered men and women who exercised the independent reason to construct their own meaning in the marketplace of ideas. And then I want to touch briefly on observation from Horton Davies' chapter comparing John Wesley and George Whitefield. Whitefield was blessed with a quote, passionate temperament, bell-like voice, gifts of mimicry, dynamic gestures, and uninhibited speech. Whitefield employed over a dozen different techniques to keep his audience fixed on the sermon. Elements of surprise, anecdotes, puns, and even satire, just to name a few. Anecdotes and stories were tailored to the audience, with dramatic stories from the Old Testament being a particular favorite of Whitefield's. His employment of a, quote, certain nautical tone and manner that were irresistible seized the attention of one such audience made up of sailors. This climax of nautical horror was described and uttered in such a manner so true as to nature that the sailors started to their feet and shouted, "The longboat! Take to the longboat!" To summarize, it's evident that George Whitefield's communication style was deeply influenced by his close connections to the mercantile world of England. Rather than the high-sounding Latin of the Orthodox Church, Whitefield employed the simpler language of the merchant and miner. Sermons and writings were directed at the individual, supported by reasoned arguments, buttressed by evidence from Scripture. Whitefield's innovations forever altered the practice of evangelicalism in England and in North America. And thank you for this time, and this concludes this recording.